I'm excited to bring in our guest who has actually spent a lot of time on Mile High Sports. And we're sitting here with Alex Harz of the Quest, Nepal. Alex has a background in film, radio, climbing, mountaineering. He's a CU Boulder grad. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Miles, it's good to sit down with you, buddy.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk with you, Alex. You just got on Mount Everest. We're just going to get to it right here off the top. Now, there's a lot of story to tell between your decision to try and go and actually getting on top, but you just summited Mount Everest.
Yeah, I'm actually fortunate to be one of the select few now that can say I'm an Everest summiteer, and I came back pretty much unscathed. To the most part, I lost 25 pounds of pure muscle mass, and the people that saw me before I left, I was pretty lean to begin with from all my training. But that's what the mountain does. We can talk about that a little bit more. The other thing is I got some nerve damage in my toes and the balls of my feet. I lost my toenails. That's from impact strikes into the ice, into the rock, thousands upon thousands of those, but they'll come back, and it's 3 feet from my heart, so I'll live.
Well, Alex, we're very happy to have you on the show today. I came on with Gil Whiteley and Mark Jackson a couple weeks ago to promote the beginning of our show. Gil said, hey, I got this guy, Alex Harz. You got to hit him up, and here we are.
Yeah, those are two very good people. They've been around the city and the state of Colorado for a long time. Great people to talk to. I've spent some time with them as well, and I always enjoy doing so when I have a chance.
Well, Alex, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is I think you have a really cool backstory here. You had this dream of getting on top of Everest since you were a child in the state of Nebraska. Couldn't be further away, seemingly. Give us the quick Cliff Notes backstory on you.
Okay, so, I was born in Spain. I grew up the early part of my life in Germany. Ultimately, after some time, we came to the United States. We ended up in Nebraska because that's where my mom's side of the family is from. The Midwest area of Nebraska, Illinois, Wisconsin. So that's why we ended up in Nebraska versus, let's say, one of the coasts. And at the age of 14, I was watching something on TV about Mount Everest. And I told myself, you know what, one day I'm going to climb that mountain. And then it all just, jumped out of my head for a long, long time. I was active in other sports, soccer and so on, and a little bit of football and stuff. And so I didn't even think about it. And then I went to school for 1 year at the University of Nebraska in Omaha before I transferred out to the CU Boulder when my parents moved out here. And I came out for the summer and I never went back. But nonetheless, after graduating from college and doing the corporate thing for quite some time, I started getting into other things, i.e. film, television, radio, and so on. And then one day I'm sitting on my couch again here in Denver, Colorado, and I wasn't watching anything about Everest. It could have been Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, who knows? It had nothing to do with mountains. But for some reason, this recollection sparked in my head, and it said, Alex, when you were 14, you said you wanted to climb Everest. And that next day I started. Next day I started training. I did my first 14er. I went up to Quandary with snowboarding gear on, the worst stuff you could possibly wear, old, Burton snowboarding boots and heavy gear, and had no idea what I was doing, but I made it to the top. And then I started getting into mountaineering, formal mountaineering training, and then climbing more 14ers. Went out to Mount Rainier, then went down to Argentina and climbed the highest mountain in South America called Aconcagua. I said, you know what? I can do it at least to 23,000 feet, because that's about the height of Aconcagua, 22,902, because you don't know till you go when it comes to altitude. And before I wanted to tackle 29,029 feet, which is the summit of Everest, I needed to see if I was even feasible to go above 20,000 feet, and I did pretty good. So the process went on, and then, a lot of things fell into line with regards to the Quest project, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And ultimately, the stars aligned for me to go to Everest this year, and I went.
So you didn't start mountaineering as a young guy.
No.
You got a little bit more life experience before you decided that you wanted to climb mountains.
Like I said, it was literally that recollection that popped in my head. And, once that happened, I had to take action. And I'm kind of one of those guys, when I set my mind to doing something, I try to figure out a way to do it. And so that's where Quandary started. It's funny because growing up, or should I say, graduating from CU Boulder and living there for 4 years, you figure that rock climbing, skiing, and all these things are just innately in you. But ultimately it wasn't. I was a Midwest guy coming out there, so it's more college football, it's soccer, these kind of things, versus, the mountain sports. So I never really got into rock climbing or mountaineering when I was going to CU.
So back before the mountaineering, you're interested in film. You do radio. Tell me about some of your film career.
Yeah, so, once I graduated college, I went to school for international business development as well as organizational communications. And I knew, or I thought I knew when I'd graduate graduate college, what I'm going to do. I'm going to do international business development, between the United States and Europe because of my German background, being able to speak German. So I did. I became a project manager for the overseas markets, or the the Germanic-speaking markets of Europe. And so I did that, and then I did some other things, internet stuff and import-export and sports marketing, Jerry Maguire kind of things to a short degree. But I couldn't be satisfied. And no matter how much money I made, and no matter how much responsibility I had at a young age, and no matter how great of a job and a title that I had, I just didn't like what I was doing. And so my buddy and I, Tom, back at CU, we were making a bunch of short films. And so we always said, one day we'll make a feature film. And we just sat down one day and we said, what are we doing? And he hated his job, even though, again, it was a good job. I hated my job, or wasn't satisfied with it, even though it was a good job. And then we both put in our 2 weeks, and we started writing a movie. And we made this movie ultimately after a course of 4.5 years later, because it takes about 3.5, 4 years to make a feature. It's called American Dream, and you can find it online and stuff. But at the end of the day, that started my new wave in life.
And you appear in PSAs for Mazda, U.S. Army. You're doing an anti-methamphetamine campaign. You appeared as a contestant on Let's Ask America. And then as you are kind of developing a niche as an on-air personality, you decide to come to Mile High Sports and do a comedy show here. Tell us about your experience at Mile High Sports and when.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So I got into improv comedy. A lot of people don't know what that is. It's all more like whose line is it anyway? So you get a suggestion, and then you make it up right there on the spot. And that's called improv comedy, and there's long form and short form. And I started doing formal training here in downtown Denver, and I really fell in love with improv comedy. So, and then I came up with this idea and said, you know what? This would be pretty cool to bring it to the radio. And so I pitched this idea to another station. They loved it. I did the show over there for about a year. And then all of a sudden, Mile High Sports got wind of it. Gil was actually one of the proponents behind it, bringing me over here. And then I ended up here at Mile High Sports and started doing the only live improvised comedy, radio, and video streaming show in the world, in the market at the time, where we literally took suggestions by calling into the Mile High Sports radio studio line or on a Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And then we would act it out live over the air here in the metro area, as well as stream it worldwide over video. You could watch us act a fool in the studio with the cameras. And so we did that here for a year and a half. And matter of fact, my last show was last June. 2017, and the reason why I stopped doing the show, and the only reason I stopped doing the show, was because the Quest Nepal project came along and started to fall into order, and I knew that if I was going to climb Mount Everest, and I knew if I was going to film in Nepal a TV show and a documentary series, that I would not have time to manage 25 fellow comedians and do a radio show simultaneous. So that's the only reason why that radio show got put on hold, and it was called the World Improv Network. You can check it out online, The Win Show or World Improv Network, if you want to listen to any of the 160 episodes or watch any of the 160 episodes.
Well, I can attest that it's not as easy as it would seem to produce a radio show. So I can empathize with you there. If you got a bunch of other stuff going on, might not be your cup of tea. So in terms of Colorado exploring and climbing, hiking, all of the above. Tell us about obviously you had to start here, right? With your training and everything. Tell us about the origins of your mountaineering career.
Yeah. So after that day of getting off the couch, within a week, I climbed Quandary, and then we went and did another mountain. We did, I think, Sherman after that, and that didn't turn out so well. Even though we did Summit, it was kind of a bad, should we say, a scouting report or not doing our homework. So we did a lot of post holing that chewed up a lot of time. We came back down in the dark, things that you typically don't want to do, especially around the winter time. And then my girlfriend at the time said, you know what, Alex, if you're going to continue to do this, I would recommend you get into some formal mountaineering training. And so we did. My climbing partner, Ben, and I started getting involved in the CMC, Colorado Mountain Club. And we started taking classes up in Boulder and then some also in Denver later on. And that's how we then got with other people to go climb, for example, Mount Rainier. And that's how we then got on to going down to South America and trying one of the 7 summits, Aconcagua, and getting our feet wet at 22,000 feet or almost 23,000 feet. And so it was, 14ers, of course, throughout the week. Try to avoid doing them on the weekend because of the traffic. Try to do them more in the wintertime whenever possible, because that's going to be more realistic to the high mountains that you get to when you go to Alaska or the Himalayas or even the Andes. So, that's how you kind of test yourself to see if you're ready for a crazy, audacious thing like Everest, is you kind of pick away at the rock and you say, okay, yeah, okay, I did all right, and I feel pretty good here, and these weather conditions were brutal, but I overcame them, and so on. And then you build up the confidence and additional skills to then try to tackle bigger peaks.
Very interesting stuff here with Alex Harz, an alumni of Mile High Sports. In fact, you'll be back here one day again when you want to get the wind going back again. But Alex summited Mount Everest late in May, and we are chatting with him here on the Mile High Outdoor Show. We're going to have to take a quick break. We're going to have the entire hour with Alex Harz, so stay tuned. We'll be right back here on Mile High Sports.
The Mile High Outdoor Show with Miles Dunklin on Mile High Sports.
Welcome back here to the Mile High Outdoor Show here on Mile High Sports. Blessed to be with you here on a Sunday afternoon in Denver, Colorado, and all over the Front Range. My name is Miles Dunklin, your host. We are pleased to be joined by Alex Harz of The Quest, Nepal. Alex has a background in film, radio, mountaineering, climbing, and he just summited Everest in May. So we talked about your background, born originally in Europe. Then you're in Nebraska as a youth. You find your way out to CU Boulder, but you're still not really a mountain guy. You're doing films, other jobs out of school. And then you start to decide, you know what, I had this dream as a child of doing Everest. I'm going to try and make this a reality. You start doing mountaineering classes. Tell us about the first couple peaks that you did, including Dunklin.
Yeah, so the Mount Rainier, once I left Colorado after doing the 14ers, Mount Rainier is kind of the next logical thing. It's out in Washington. It's a beautiful mountain. It sits out in the middle in itself in Rainier National Park, and it's a good training peak as well as a tester because it's actually a glaciated peak. So you have to be roped up, and there's crevasse travel and so on. And so these are the things that we don't get in Colorado. So a good way to test yourself with those skills is to go to a mountain like Rainier. And plus, it's not an easy mountain per se, especially the route that we took. And so you go there and you test yourself. You say, okay, all the mountaineering skills that I just learned formally and that I've been putting to use here in the 14ers, let's go try it out at Mount Rainier. And then if that works out well, then you go bigger. Then you start heading maybe south to Mexico and go to Orzaba, or you go down to South America and climb some of the, volcanoes in Ecuador or so on. And in our case, or in my case specifically, we went to Argentina and said, you know what, let's go from 14,000 and change, and let's go straight to 22,903. And in between that process, I became a guinea pig for the Altitude Research Center out here in Denver, which is actually one of the foremost altitude research facilities in the world, where they put you in a hyperbaric chamber and they do cognitive tests and they try to get you to pass out by rebreathing your air, and they do all different kinds of testing on you to see how you hack it. It's between 16 and 17,000 feet, but it still wasn't high enough. And that's really where you start seeing, the signs of altitude is when you get above 17,000 feet. Because there's never been a civilization that's lived above 17,000 feet. You can't stay there indefinitely. So I was like, well, that's good, but I still need to go to a higher mountain to see how my body responds. And so Aconcagua was chosen, and that's where we ended up going. And I was fortunate enough to summit that mountain. And so I said, okay, now let the wheels continue to spin. We went to Denali after that. Denali is not as high, from an actual benchmark standpoint, but it's an extremely difficult mountain. Again, it's a bigger version of kind of a Rainier. It's a beast. It's some of the most brutal weather on the planet Earth. It's, again, glaciated. You're lugging a sled. My partner and I each had over 140 pounds of weight that we were carrying up the mountain, and you have to sustain yourself the whole time, and you're dragging a sled and carrying a heavy pack, and you're dealing with the elements, and it was just him and I. So, it was really a good way to test ourselves, to test our mettle, and to see how we can do under really, really physical grueling conditions, as well as conditions that the mountain throw at you. And so, so that was successful as well. And then it's time to now start looking towards the east. And now you have to start looking towards the Himalayas.
So what's the timeline here? When did you do Denali?
Denali was in 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
So you're still 5-6 years out from actually getting on top of Everest. What were the stepping stones between that and then early in 2017 when Everest started to become in focus?
Well, after Aconcagua, I started getting this idea, thinking, all right, use some of my film and some of my television and production experience to make a project out of this. The reason being is when I stood on top of Aconcagua, I said, this is an amazing view. absolutely gorgeous. You can see through the whole country of Chile to the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it was awesome. But I said, I've got to do this for more than just myself, because people are dying on these mountains. So I'm like, for me to go up there and just climb the mountain and stand up there for 15 minutes, 30 minutes or an hour if you're lucky, that just wasn't enough for me. I figured I have to do something to maximize, these expeditions. And so that's when the wheels started spinning, to do some kind of film television project. And then went to Denali. That really affirmed it, because Denali's, again, a very dangerous mountain, statistically one of the 10 most dangerous mountains in the world. And so you see some stuff, and, we experienced, some people that got in trouble and ended up dying. And so you think, all right, I've got to now really focus in on doing this for something bigger. And so now you have to say, okay, not just go to Everest from a climbing standpoint. Now you got to put together the logistics of a project. And in this case, the quest, with the first season being in Nepal, or the first, set of documentary films being in Nepal, started to come to mind. And then once, last and say in about 2016-ish, mid of that year, I think I really had the formula dialed in. From 2012 to 2016, I was starting to explore different ways of making these projects happen and what might be the best way, and also the time to do it, because you have to set pretty much your whole life aside to climb a mountain like Everest from a training and from a actual 2-month standpoint of climbing it, but then also do the filming of it and putting together the production side of things takes a tremendous amount of time. So once the quest started looking like it was going to become a reality in the beginning of 2017, that's when I knew, okay, by mid-17, by June, I was like, okay, this is where I have to cut all ties to everything else that I'm currently doing and go 100% in on the Everest side of things.
So in June 2017, the quest is now a thing.
Yeah.
It's now materializing. You decide you have to put the rest of your life away, including Mile High Sports. So take us to the start there of the quest, and now that Everest is now in focus. How does your life change now that you have this long-term goal of I need to get to this top of this mountain and produce a film as well?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why you were there. But this is a year-long project.
Absolutely right. So the first thing that started to happen was I got to train. And so I decided I'm going to train 7 days a week. And so what I did is I had to set the time aside for that. Like you said, you have to put everything on hold. And so my regiment for going to Everest, which is different for everyone, but for me, Mondays I would run 10 to 15 miles. Tuesdays I would do heavy pack work, either 1,000 or 1,500 step-ups with 60 to 70 pounds on my back, and do them on park benches. So I would do that on Tuesdays. And Wednesdays I would do hill sprints or the bicycle. Thursday, I would do upper body only. Friday, again, I would run 10 to 15 miles. Saturdays, again, heavy pack work, either step ups or go do, for example, one of the, training peaks in the Front Range. And then Sundays, I would do upper body. And then the week started again. I did that for every single day, for 7 days a week, because I wanted to make sure that the one thing that wasn't going to limit me from being successful, because there's a lot of factors that do come into play on whether or not you can stand on the top of the world, was not going to be my training. And so that was a couple hours every single day, and alone was just the training side of things. Stop drinking, 100% committed to it.
I'm assuming diet was locked in at this point as well. What kind of diet were you eating to get ready?
So there I was focusing heavily on proteins, but also carbs, from the fact that I was burning so much from a training standpoint. And then trying to be, healthy, cleaner carbs, instead of smacking down French fries, okay, let's do rice, brown rice, these kind of things. Focus on the things that are going to be good for me as I'm training, but try to mitigate the amount of weight that I would be losing. And I did lose some weight, but more than anything, I leaned out, which ultimately then I leaned out even more by the time I got back to Kathmandu after climbing Everest.
So you're getting in this incredible shape. You're running 30 miles a week. You're doing all these weighted step-ups, which, by the way, that step-up training sounds incredible, doing a couple thousand a day. So you've done all this. Now you're actually ready to head to Nepal. Mm-hmm. You spend 2 months in Nepal. This is obviously a big part of what the quest is about. It's not just the mountain of Everest. So you've gotten to Nepal. What's it like there?
Well, Nepal was, as soon as you land in Kathmandu, you're right away taken to a whole new place and a whole different time. You get out of the airport, you scramble to get into a shuttle to get to your hotel, and you realize, wow, this is like no place I've ever been. The dirty, dusty streets, from the lack of them being paved or being destroyed by the earthquake in 2015, to the hustle and bustle of modernization, trying to get to where, for example, what we take for granted on a daily basis where they want to be. And so then you start to you realize some of the stuff that this project is all about, which is telling the untold, rarely seen, captivating stories of Nepal. It's not just Mount Everest. It's about the birthplace of Buddhism, which is not in India. It's actually in Nepal. It's about tiger and rhino conservation, which the Nepalese do the best because they use their military to get involved in the conservation efforts. It's about, the immunity to malaria. There's a people there called the Taru people in Nepal that are actually developed an immunity to malaria, and it has kept them from getting conquered for hundreds to thousands of years. So it's these interesting stories that you don't hear about in the West, especially in Europe and South America, North America, that we wanted to showcase to the world. And then giving you a different twist on Everest, documenting the whole process of the trek, the 9-day trek to base camp, filming it in 360 VR cam, talking about the religious aspects and significance of the mountain, to the economic impacts of the Khumbu, that it's seen because of Mount Everest sits at the end of the valley, and these kind of things that you don't see about when you see something about Everest. It's usually just the physical aspect from base camp to the summit and back.
We're talking with Alex Harz, a local mountaineer, a CU grad that stood on top of the world as recently as about a month and a half ago. As we're chatting with Alex here on the Mile High Outdoor Show, with you here on a Sunday afternoon. We're going to have to take a quick break. Another half hour with Alex Harz is coming your way here next on Mile High Sports.
The Mile High Outdoor Show with Miles Dunklin on Mile High Sports.
Welcome back here to the Mile High Outdoor Show, here from the Mile High Sports Studios in Denver, Colorado. I want to let everyone know they can text or call the show 303-831-1340. You can find me on social media at Miles Dunklin, MILESDUNKLIN. That's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the above, as we are hanging out with Alex Harz, local mountaineer, just summited Everest. And we're talking about The Quest, which is a TV series that Alex is producing, hopefully season 1 of many of The Quest. We've been talking so far about Alex's experience and how he got to Nepal, how he developed his passion for mountaineering and the will to even go to Everest. And we just talked about arriving in Nepal, kind of having some of that culture shock, experiencing some of those things. What surprised you most about the Nepalese people and being in that country?
Well, the initial thing that surprised me the most was the fact that everyone thinks, when you think Nepal, of course, it's this exotic mysticism, which it is to a large degree, but you think it's a Buddhist country. Because, the Buddhas from Nepal, Buddhism, spread initially throughout Nepal and Tibet, but actually 80% of that country is Hindu. And so that initially surprised me, and I knew a lot about these kind of things because we're going to shoot it, but to actually see it in your face on a daily basis, how predominantly Hindu Nepal is, until you get up into the Khumbu Valley, until you start trekking towards Everest, where then Buddhism really starts to be the predominant religion because of the Sherpa people who came out of Tibet and these kind of things. That was probably what initially shocked me the most. The stuff, the different level of modernism didn't shock me as much because I've done a lot of traveling, but it's still something that you can't avoid. So between those two things, those are the things that probably, kind of hit home the most as soon as I landed. And then, of course, those experiences, become normal after several days of filming, and you start getting involved in what you're out there to do. But the things that you don't ever expect, we went to a place called Pashupatinath, which is a huge Hindu UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they're actually doing open air cremations all day, every day. And it's not too common to see an open air cremation. You're talking about over a wood fire like you would see in Game of Thrones or something. And so, but that's something that they still do there. And after filming there for 8 hours, this is a perfect example. We come back to the hotel room and I say to one of my cameramen, I said, Sam, do you have that shot of me with the cows in the foreground and the burning bodies in the background and then the earthquake rubble behind that? And he said to me, Alex, you know what you just said to me? I said, what? He goes, you asked me about a shot with you kneeling next to some cows with burning bodies in the background and then earthquake rubble behind that. And you have to kind of step outside the box and say, yeah, that sounds preposterous, but that's actually what we were filming. And our clothes were stinking like a campfire, but not from sitting by a campfire, from filming burning bodies for 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So these are the things that kind of hit you, and it's something you don't prepare for. But then they become a reality and almost a normality as the longer you're there.
And so that's the country of Nepal and the area you're in there, but the Himalayas themselves. So you're obviously very familiar with the Rocky Mountains. Compare the Himalayas to the Rockies. You have India smashing into Asia, forcing these monstrous mountains that are nothing like you've seen anywhere else in the world. Describe the Himalayas.
Yeah, the Himalaya mountains. I mean, I've been to the Alaska range where Denali is. I've been to the Andes, where Aconcagua is in South America. I've seen the Alps in Europe, and of course, I've live in the backyard of the Rockies. But the Himalayas are like no other mountains in the world, and you see them, and you say, "Gosh, all the mountains I've seen before are extremely beautiful." But nothing really, really compares to the Himalayas because how big they are, how stark they are, how just prominent and how small they make you feel when you start getting higher and higher, and you get closer and closer to some of these peaks that you've only seen either in history books or watched on YouTube or seen in some kind of film. And then when you're actually getting closer to these peaks and you start to stand next to them, you realize, wow, these things are just absolutely massive and breathtaking. So
you've done all the training. You've done a year of 1,000 step-ups and 30 miles and all the upper body training and all the endurance, all the climbing, all the mountaineering, learning all the training that you've done. And now you're in Nepal. You're getting acclimatized a little bit to the elevation. Tell me about now. There's you don't just drive to the trailhead.
No.
At Mount Everest. Tell us about the trek.
Okay, so what happens is you usually take a little puddle jumper, a little tiny plane, or a smaller commuter-style plane, and you fly to Lukla. Lukla is kind of the staging area for the treks that go to Mount Everest. That trek will then take somewhere between 9 and 12 days, and you start to head up the Khumbu Valley, and that's where Everest is literally at the end of the Khumbu Valley. So when you fly to Lukla, you're somewhere between 8,000 to 9,000 feet, and you have to work your way up to 17,500 feet, which is what Everest Base Camp is at. And so during that time, you have to cover quite a bit of interesting terrain and different kind of, ecological zones, but you're also acclimatizing. So you have to get used to that altitude, and you have to take it fairly slow. So we would go, the first day we went to a village called Phakding, and we'd spend the night in a tea house there. The next day, day 2, we go to Namche Bazaar, which is kind of the Sherpa capital of the Khumbu Valley. And the Sherpa doesn't refer to, let's say, mountaineers or porters. It's an ethnic culture that came out of Tibet. So that's where you really kind of sit home and get a little bit of a base before you go up higher.
Right. And then you're actually getting to base camp, and then tell us about, so there's base camp and then there's 4 other camps before you actually approach the summit.
Correct. So once you get to base camp after day 9, you're going to know exactly kind of how you feel up at 17,500 feet. And there's people that have to, say, okay, this is not for me. I have to head back down. I'm not acclimatizing well or whatnot. But if you're in it for the rest of the expedition, which for me it was 51 days, that was our team, it was 51 days to climb the mountain. You then have to go through the process of acclimatizing even more. And what that is your body is trying to produce more red blood cells to try to survive and to coexist at an altitude that humans aren't meant to be. And so your digestive system starts to shut down, your immune system shuts down, all the non-essential things to stay alive begin to shut down, which then of course has a huge toll and wear and tear on your body. But you have to acclimatize in order to even stay at that altitude and go any higher. So you make these rotations, as they call it, up and down the mountain over the course of the next month or so in order to get yourself ready for that summit push. When that weather window opens up, as the monsoons push out of India and push the jet stream that literally flies over the summit of Everest off the summit for that brief window between 5 to, let's say, 12, 13 days where you can go for the summit, and you try to prepare yourself for that one moment in time to make it towards the summit, which takes 5 days from base camp to do. And that's why you do those rotations.
We're talking with Alex Harz, a local mountaineer that just summited Everest. We're talking with him about his experience in Nepal and the TV show that he has produced, The Quest Nepal, hopefully season 1 of many. We're going to have to take another quick break. When we come back, Alex is going to tell us about what it's like to be on top of the world here on Mile High Sports.
The Mile High Outdoor Show with Miles Dunklin on Mile High Sports.
Welcome back here to Mile High Sports. You're listening here to the Mile High Outdoor Show. I'm your host, Miles Dunklin, and we're hanging out with Alex Harz. Alex is a local mountaineer that just summited Everest. We've been talking with Alex about his entire journey here throughout the show, from growing up in Nebraska, having the idea of wanting to summit Everest, to a year's worth of training, intensive diet, all of the above. You just told us about the long trek, 9 days into the base area. And then you said you spent 36 days in that area before you actually went for the summit?
Yeah, I think it was somewhere around 39. So when you go for the summit, it takes 5 days to get to the summit and another 2 to get back down from base camp. So after you do the rotations, that we briefly touched upon, is where you go up higher into the mountains to the different part of the different camps in order to acclimatize. Once you get your body acclimatized at 24,000 feet, above that you can't produce any more red blood cells, which is Camp 3 on Everest, on the steep Lhotse face, which is just a vertical ice wall of 5,000 feet, up to the highest camp, which is South Col, or what you see in the movies where all the tents are battered down from wind. That's 26,000 feet, or the death zone. Once you got yourself in a position to now go for the summit, the thing that you have to now do is wait for the weather projections. Ours came from Belgium, out of Europe. And again, it's dependent, like we briefly mentioned, the monsoon seasons that generate out of India. They push the jet stream off the summit of Everest for a brief moment in time. And that's what your projections try to tell you. And based on that, you pick a summit day. In our case, it turned out to be May 21st. And then you say, all right, 5 days before that, on the 16th, you head out for the summit, or the 17th of the morning of, you head out for the summit, and then you're all in. And then there's really not going to be any changing of plans at that point in time. You go up and you hope everything works out. So what happened for us, we left in the morning of, I think, the 17th. So you leave through the infamous Khumbu Icefall, which is famous for the avalanches and the Serac Falls. And it's famous also, of course, for a lot of the people that have lost their lives there due to those things that can happen to you. It's a Russian roulette, essentially, going through the icefall. And every time I went through, it was different. You go up through the icefall. We bypassed Camp 1 and went straight to Camp 2. And there we spent the night. Took one a day to do a rest day to get ourselves geared up for our summit gear, because we shoveled the stuff up to Camp 2 in order to get us ready for the upper mountain. So you don't take everything with you, and you use different stuff depending on what part of the mountain you're on. We leave Camp 2 and we head up that steep Lhotse face I told you about. And we get to Camp 3 and we spend the night there. And that's when you now start to get into the mode of supplemental oxygen and these kind of things in order to sustain you and get you, ready for the next several days towards the summit. We spent one night at Camp 3, and now we're doing the rest of that steep climb up to get to Camp 4, from up the Lhotse face from Camp 3 to Camp 4. We get to the tent somewhere about 5 or 6 in the afternoon on the 20th. And we get there, and then we knew that we had to get back out of the tents 5-6 hours later to go for the summit. So there's no sleep. We got 1 liter of water in us. We got us a spoonful of dehydrated food, and the wind is howling like crazy, because essentially South Col lays between the highest mountain, which is Everest to your left if you're looking at it, and Lhotse, which is the 4th highest mountain in the world, to your right. And it's kind of a wind tunnel because the other side is China. So the wind just kind of rips through there. And so getting any kind of rest is almost impossible as you're sitting in your tent gearing up. And so you just went 10 to 12 hours right before then, and you're sitting in your tent just trying to get some hydration, trying to get anything in you can. And now you have to get ready to go out in the middle of the night again to go to the summit.
So the day of, it's May 21st. You guys wake up real early, like around midnight.
We leave at midnight. Yeah.
You go for the summit.
Yep, we go for the summit. I step out of the tent. I look at my expedition leader, friend of mine. His name is Ryan Waters. I look at Ryan and I say, the wind's howling pretty good. I said, we're going up in this? And he says, yeah, my weather projections show that once we get a little bit out of South Col, the wind will die off. And I told Ryan back at base camp, I'm with you, live or die. Whatever decision you make, I'm gonna abide by it, and I won't question it. Don't worry about me. And he was right. And so him and I left. We were the first ones out of the tents and getting out in the middle of the night. And the only thing that you have to see is your headlight. So you have your headlamp on, and then all of a sudden the wind dies down, and then you see the absolute most crystal clear stars you could ever imagine a human eyes to set on. And so between the stars and the headlamp, you go up the steep triangular face of Everest, hour after hour after hour after hour, until dawn breaks. And then dawn breaks, and then you get somewhere around the area of the famous balcony, which is about the only place on the mountain where you can sit down and actually try to hydrate and try to take a little bit of a break, or a breather, which of course is a funny thing to say because there's no breather at 27,500 feet. And you pass by a dead body here or there, and that puts you back in focus, even more hyper focused than you have to already be. And for me, I told myself when dawn broke and I saw this dead body off to my right about 10 yards, I said to myself, Alex, don't sit down, don't stop, don't fall, don't make a mistake, don't die. You can do this. And I had to make sure to kind of refocus myself to just keep going and to be even more focused than I was at the time. We get to the balcony. Ryan and I are there, and we're waiting for the rest of the team to come up. Ryan looks at me and says, Alex, I want you to go for the summit with another guy when he gets up here. I'm going to stay with the rest of the team, but I think you can make it. I want you to go. And so I started heading up the Southeast Ridge, which is actually the geographical border between Nepal and China. And so that's the route that you take up to the summit. And I'm going by myself for a little while here. It's now daytime in the morning. And I look back and I don't see the initial person that's coming with me. I see another person that's coming with me. So I stop, I wait for him. And then him and I had the whole upper mountain to ourselves, all the way to the summit, which is kind of unheard of on Everest. And we climbed, the rest of the way, all the way to the summit. We got to the summit, and then we got up there and there's no one up there. The first thing I did is I looked at Tashi, my buddy Tashi, who was with me. And I literally just kneeled down and I gave thanks to the mountain, which the Sherpa people call Chomolungma, which means goddess mother of earth. It's a very religious place for them. It's actually the mother of earth embodied in a mountain. And I gave my thanks to Chomolungma and I cried. And I think it was probably a mix of, this dream that I had since I was 14 and a lot of physical and emotional release at that time. But also, the fact that I couldn't believe I was there. I looked down into China, which is another major route coming up, to see if anyone else was coming up. No one was coming up. So Tashi and I had the whole summit to ourselves on a Bluebird day for 30 to 40 minutes. And then we started doing the filming for the quest stuff that we needed to get the footage, the pictures and the stills, and just had a great, almost of a bromance up there. Before we headed back down because his hands started getting cold and he's had a problem with his oxygen mask that we then had to fix about 30 vertical meters below the summit. And that, of course, is a pretty serious situation. And then as we headed down, the only thing that we saw on the way up was the rest of our team. And they got up there about an hour after we did. We kept going down. We checked in on them when we got back to the balcony to see if we could see them up on the summit ridge. They were coming back down. And we got back to the tents somewhere around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we've been out for quite some time at that point, and the rest of the team got back a little bit later thereafter. And but now you're only part of the way back down. You still have to get back down to base camp, and you have to go back down that steep Lhotse face, 5,000 vertical feet, just to get back to Camp 2. And you've got no sleep, and you're dehydrated, and you're tired, and you're spent. But you got to make it down because getting up is optional. Making it down is absolutely mandatory. We then get back to Camp 2. The next day we get up to go back to base camp, and we go back through that infamous Khumbu icefall, and the biggest avalanche of all the avalanches that I saw while I was there actually happened to hit while we were in the icefall. Luckily, we didn't get hit by it. Luckily, the rest of our team that was behind us did get hit by it because of some logistical reasons that held them up, and that could have saved their life. And now you're back at base camp, and now you can kindly set your guard down a little bit, and it's time to unwind and get some release after getting beat up for all that time.
So obviously there's a long journey home after that as well, but what does it feel like now, a month plus out? Are you still kind of comprehending that you stood on top of the world?
Yeah, it's these situations where it starts to dawn on me a little bit. It's when I do the interviews or I talk to some people where they give me stats, saying, hey, Alex, there's more people that have played in the Super Bowl than have climbed Mount Everest. These kind of things where you got to pinch yourself and kind of realize that, this is something that was not only a childhood dream, it was not only for this project called The Quest, Nepal, but it was also something that kind of makes you realize, this is something that is pretty unique. And it's these situations where I have to start to now, take hold of what actually happened, because I'm still in the midst of this project, and now I have to go through the post-production and, get all this kind of stuff taken care of, that I haven't had time really to breathe so much, but I've had some time to decompress and to look back and reflect a little bit. And it's pretty cool to sit here now and talking to you to say, what, I'm honored, I'm graciously humbled and fortunate enough to say that I'm now officially an Everest summiteer.
What happened to your body?
Well, I lost 25 pounds of pure muscle. The people that saw me before I left, I was extremely lean. because of all the training I had to do during that time. But I lost 25 pounds of pure muscle because what happens there on Everest, you have a caloric deficiency that is extremely high. And on top of that, because of your digestive system shutting down above 17,000 feet, you just slowly deteriorate. And you also quickly deteriorate because of the physical exertion of it, that it literally chews up your muscle. And so I came back as skinny as I've been since high school. And now I'm slowly trying to put that back on me so I can look a little bit more normal.
Well, I think you look pretty good still today here, Alex. So the quest itself. So now in post-production,
yes.
Where can we look to see the quest going forward?
So the best thing to do if you want to keep track of it as it sits currently and as it moves forward is go to Facebook, either look up me, Alex Harz, Harz, and link through to the Quest TV series, or you can just Google the Quest TV series and then you can find it there as well, Instagram, you name it, and that will give you updates. So if you subscribe to that, like that, you're going to get updates, of what's going on. And so the idea now is to put together the 6 to 8 episodes as well as potentially some standalone documentaries and then release that as a season 1. And then season 2, we're hoping to go to Indonesia, Antarctica, Tanzania as we move forward. And we hope to make this an ongoing series to basically go to these fascinating places on Earth and show you stuff that you don't usually see and tell you stories that you don't normally hear or visualize, and then also take you on some amazing adventures along the way.
We're talking with Alex Harz, a local mountaineer that just summited Everest. I got 2 more questions for you. What advice would you give to someone if they have a goal and they want to go get it?
Yeah, I think the thing that you need to do is to say, dial it in and look at it like a sniper would. And say, you know what, this is what I want to achieve. And I've had the dedication, determination, half the education, and a little bit of luck. In this country, you can make it happen. So that's the pieces that you have to achieve it. And then if you're willing to stay determined and keep focused, this might not happen overnight, but eventually you can get there. And then you can have your own personal Everest, whatever that may or may not be.
Anything else you want to add, Alex?
Well, first of all, I would like to say it's great talking to you, Miles, to see some of my Mile High sports brethren here as well. It's, I don't see them that often anymore. And, at the end of the day, just if you have something that you want to achieve, and if it's Everest, go ahead, feel free to send me, any kind of email or anything that you want. I'll try to give you some information, but, go out there and get it. It's there to be taken. Yeah, Everest is not necessarily always the best example from that standpoint because there's some limiting factors, but you can pretty much overcome most things in life if you're willing to fight for it.
Alex, where can everybody find you if they want to keep up with what you're doing?
Yep. So you can either Google me, Alex Harz, Harz, that's my last name, or go to alexharz.com. Hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, so on, or type in the Quest TV series and find us that way on Facebook and Instagram and so forth.
Alex, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Miles.
Thank you very much. That will do it for today's show. We are all out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Mile High Outdoor Show on Mile High Sports.